Most business owners have no idea what their company is actually worth. They've got a number in their head. Maybe it's based on revenue, gut instinct, or something that they've heard at a networking event. But when it comes time to raise capital, plan an exit, or even just sleep at night, the number falls apart. In today's episode, I'm joined by Kyle McCulloch, a Wall Street trained, Main Street minded, and now the VP of North America at BizVal, a firm that specializes in real world valuations for businesses between $1 and $50 million. We're breaking down what it actually drives, the value of your business, and more importantly, how to increase it strategically before you even think about selling. So if you're building a business that you want to last, to exit, or to pass down one day, this conversation is one you cannot afford to miss. Let's dive in. Kyle, what is the number one thing that most business owners get wrong about a business valuation?
The number.
The number? Tell me more about that. Why?
No.
Why? What is it about the number that that most businesses get wrong?
I'm being a little bit cheeky in saying that. No, I mean, I think a lot of people just frankly have no idea what their businesses are valued at. Business valuations, I think through maybe an educational standpoint have missed the mark with something. And they've been represented in a sense like rather than getting your health check, you go to the doctor when you have a heart attack, and that's when you start worrying about fitness and worrying about your diet. Valuation should be looked at as a key metric for your business. I mean, essentially, when we're in business, what we're in business for, at least, is growing the value of your business, so that maybe, hopefully, you've got that optionality further down the line to exit if you need to. Then I heard a stat recently. I think 80% of most small and medium-sized business owners' wealth is tied up in their business. So now you get to retirement age, you want to sell your business and have, go on those trips that you've been putting off for all these years while you've been busy running a business, and you get a surprise, you can't sell your business because it's missing the fundamentals needed to actually make it sellable.
When I hear a lot of the conversation when it comes to business valuation are those that have never done one, right? Take a lot of these small businesses, probably very similar to what you just described. And, I think there's a lot of misconception out there in terms of, well, what number does this multiple work off of? And I hear a lot of businesses saying, well, yeah, I'm going to get a multiple of revenue and different things like this. And, what are multiples traditionally built off of in a business?
So you're looking at different components of the business. I mean, so also just want to say with multiples, especially earnings multiples, it's really a sense check. Like, how hot is the market? We construct multiples basically from scratch, essentially. So we take a base multiple of where the market's trading, and then we look at the risk factors associated with the business. And that goes down from the age of the business to, a variety. I mean, level of debt, and those adjust the multiples. So, a good way of looking at a multiple is kind of like you used to swim as well. It's something that we both did, and if somebody asked me, like, what's my ability to swim, 100 free, and I turned around and I said, 49.8. In the context of a multiple, that's looking at a certain specific point in time. Multiple is as good as the period that the business is doing business in. It doesn't really look forward. So you're assuming that the market conditions are remaining exactly the same for the multiple to hold true. So I do think with multiples, it's a very common approach that people take, but I think it needs to be looked at as more of a sense check. Look, if you come in and do a valuation with us and we have a lower multiple than the market, well, the market might be hot at the time, and it's probably a good idea to sell in that market.
I really like that. I think there's a number of things in there that I want to dig into as we get more technical in the conversation. But for the audience, for the viewers that have not met you before, we're talking a little bit about business valuation today. Your role over at BizVal. Why don't you give us a little bit of history about you? Obviously, you mentioned we both swam, once upon a time, which is a fun thing that we've got in common. But share just a little bit about what brings you to the table today? What's been a little bit of your experience? What's kind of been the journey, and then joining BizVal and kind of what you're focused on today?
Yeah, certainly. So as you can hear from my accent, I grew up in South Africa, so a little further abroad and further south. But at the ripe age of 22, I flew over to New York. Our family had won the green card lottery, and I'd been trading commodity derivatives for a bank for, I think, about 4 years before that. So of course, 22, you don't really know what you don't know yet. So I came marching in, didn't know anyone on the continent, and I thought, Jamie Dimon, all these big names that you hear of. And I thought they'll definitely want me. I mean, like, who that's just graduated college comes with 4 years of experience in this? I had a bit of a reality check when I got to New York, and no one wanted to talk to me. And I ended up having to go to bars, basically in the financial type areas in Park Avenue, dressed up in a suit, like little market macro reports built up. These were essentially reports on what was going on in the market. They were my thoughts, but they were not for any company. And so I'd hand them out. I'd be like, I just wrote this. What do you think of this? And anyway, I ended up meeting the CEO of a quant trading firm when at one of the bars. And anyway, he looked at it. He said, there's some good thoughts in here. Like, let's talk if you ever want a job. So I said to him at that point, I said, look, game's up. Like, I'm running out of money really quickly, and I need a job. So anyway, he was really nice about it, and invited me in. And one of the first questions he asked me, because I had one goal when I got to New York, I wanted to be a trader, and there was literally no other option. I didn't know that there were too many other options for me. Very one-minded when I lock onto something. And so he asked me what languages I could write. And so now, I'm thinking like English, Afrikaans, Zulu, all of these spoken languages, not realizing that in the world of trading in New York, it's all algorithmic based nowadays. So that kind of didn't really land too well, but he saw the humor in it. And so I got my first job ready, just coming up with trading strategies and communicating them to the quants who would then implement them. But I knew that wasn't where I was going to be long term. I mean, there was no ways I was going to catch up to these people in any, in any short timeline at least. So I pivoted. I ended up going into macro research for a hedge fund. Worked a lot on the risk management side of things, and then ended up going into the cybersecurity world. So I ended up basically doing a project within the Japanese government and doing a feasibility study and really assessing whether it should be an internal thing or whether it should be spun out as a non-profit, which is what we ended up doing. And so we grew that, and that kind of got me into the flow of things in the cybersecurity world. And thereafter, I ended up in geopolitical cyber risk. So we kind of drove that industry in a sense. There was no one really doing it. And what we were doing was we were looking at, for example, if a hedge fund bought an oil field in the Saudi Gulf, who are the potential, the potential bad guys that are going to go after them? How are they going to go after them? What are their capabilities? What are the defensive capabilities of the nation that you're operating in, and what sort of a risk profile do you assess to that? So I did that for probably 4.5, 5 years, and just had the classic New York thing of just burning out completely. So I flew over to the West Coast, and I was like, I'm just going to do something that's fairly easy to do. It's not going to require that much time and effort from me. And so I ended up going and working for a small business. And when I was hired to essentially like professionalize the business and get it ready for sale. So I thought, how hard can this be? This business had been operating, I think, 22 years at the time, generating good profits. But when I asked for the books, there had never been a budget. There were no operating manuals. Turnover was frequent. And so that kind of, I don't know, I held on for a decently long time in that role, trying to get something, kind of get it to the finish line. But it opened my eyes to the fact that a lot of small businesses are just ill-equipped to do what they need to do to keep their businesses running like a business. And that's not a bash on any small business owners. I mean, you might be a plumber and you do a really good job, so you hire your friend, and then he hires his friend, and eventually you've got 100 employees, just say, and you're doing X amount in business, but you're still essentially a plumber, and like you're doing the best you can. But I think a lot of businesses face that challenge. So when I got introduced to Graham at BizVal, I think just everything kind of came in full circle. I ended up getting back into the more heavy finance side of things. And I got to work with small and mid-sized businesses. So my role, and it's a fairly, I hope you can forgive my long-winded answer here, but yeah, my role for BizVal is really growing out the US markets. So we started in South Africa, kind of ran that as a pilot, ended up in the UK, and now we're going after the North American market.
It's such an interesting journey. And it's fun to kind of see the throughput, right? What's the through line between kind of all the different things that you've been a part of, and clearly there's been a lot that has, if it comes down to understanding kind of data and numbers and risk assessment and different things like that, from finance to cybersecurity to working with small business, looking how to sell it. I can see a lot of connection points in there. It's kind of cool to see how it has come full circle for you at this particular point. So what are some of those skills that you've accumulated over that journey that you get to kind of deploy within your role at BizVal today?
That's a good question. I mean, each role has been so different, but I mean, you can take something from every role. I mean, I would say if we broke my career up into thirds, the first third taught me resilience. Having to figure it out, like land in a new place, figure it out. You've got no friends. No one wants to talk to you. You've got a funny accent. So no one trusts you. I mean, if you're working in an early stage company, without that, like pack your bags and go home, because nothing ever goes exactly according to plan. And you've just got to learn how to kind of pull back a little bit and appreciate it for what it is. I mean, I was talking to our CEO, Graham, who you know as well, this morning, and said, if this was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, like I would have probably run by now. My lack of patience would have been like, hey, I expected this to be, X size at this point. So I would say that there's a very, very critical skill. I think in the second third taught me hard work, the importance of documenting processes. That was something that I'd never really thought about that kind of stuff before. But the documentation of processes is so critical, and also it's a big driver of valuation, surprisingly. You have an owner that has got everything in his head, he gets run over, you got no business. Your valuation is zero. And then in obviously the latter part of my career, working for a small business, I mean, it just teed me up to understand some of the struggles that small businesses kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis. And kind of the right questions to ask them. And look, I'm not the valuation specialist within our team that there's left to Stephen to handle, but I do spend a lot of time on these calls with clients as well, and just trying to understand the pain points and see it from their perspective, and also maybe some of their blind spots that they haven't even thought about. I think that last part of my career definitely helped with.
Well, that's kind of what I'm excited to dig into today, because we could sit here and we could talk all the technical aspects of business valuation and things like that, which I think are totally warranted. But the reality is, a lot of our audience is going to be small business owners who haven't really thought about the valuation type thing. What are some things that maybe I should be thinking about or should be doing? So I'd love to kind of dig a little bit into that. So when you mentioned some of the blind spots that business owners may have, what do you mean by that? What are some things that you've noticed or have been able to kind of shed some light on for businesses based on the experience that you've gone through, and now kind of understanding how this business valuation piece can fit into it? What are some of those blind spots?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the owners very often will kind of concentrate a lot of the efforts and a lot of the knowledge, like kind of concentrated around themselves. And I can, it took me a long time to wrap my head around this. The guy that I work for, I'm like, why will this guy not let go? And then I thought, geez, you spent 20 years building something. It's probably quite difficult to hand that off to a bunch of people and say, hey guys, you run with it. Now the counter argument to that is like, if you're not willing to do that, you've probably hired the wrong people. But there's still that kind of mindset that has to break. And for some people it's easy, for some people it's really difficult. The other blind spot is on client concentration. You end up having too many. Well, you have one client that's bringing in 90% of your revenue, and that client leaves. What happens to your business? I mean, that's kind of a worst case scenario, actually, because you've gone and staffed up for all of this, and now you've got 50 people on payroll, and that client leaves. You're effectively, your expenses exceed your revenue lines. So
from your experience, I'm curious, do you see that being as something that business owners are just not paying attention to, or they know it and just don't realize that it's as big of a risk as it might be?
I think probably the latter. What I also think happens with these sort of things is that you get this big client, you have to focus a lot of energy into servicing that big client, and then everything else goes in the back burner. What I think is probably a better approach, it's also a difficult approach to get right, is take 20% of that revenue off that big client, reinvest that into hiring maybe a sales team to go after other clients of the same sort of caliber. Once you've got one big client, as long as you're not under any sort of an NDA, if it's public knowledge, use that as leverage to go and get their competitor or, someone downstream from them, but you definitely want to de-risk. Now that's essentially what valuations are. It's cash flow and risk. So you want to really work on de-risking your business as much as possible.
So let's come back to the owner dependency piece, which is really there's so much that's locked in the owner's head. You had mentioned the importance of documenting in systems and things like that. I know there's a lot of emotional entanglements that can happen with the business owner and being able to let go, but what are some of the other things that you've noticed just in your experiences on why that maybe isn't happening as frequently as it should be with some of these businesses?
Look, I would say for most of the businesses that we're dealing with, they're able to go away for a 3-week holiday, but be available to the team, which at the end of our valuation process, I mean, we've tried to make it pragmatic and simple, like simplify the language around it to really help the owners understand what we're kind of driving towards. The last question we ask is, if you take a 3-week holiday, like what's the effect on the business? And it ranges from, I can take a 3-week holiday and the business continues unaffected, I don't need self-service or anything, all the way down to like I can barely manage a 3-minute bathroom break, for instance. Most of our people can take a 3-week holiday, but the ones that can't, I think it's just a case of just getting just too focused on the day-to-day operations and maintaining control. And that can sometimes be something where you need to kind of look inward and ask yourself, like, what's the reason for that? I'm saying this, it's much easier for me to say this, but I've been there. Like I've had my moments. You manage people for the first time. You think it's going to be easy, and then you realize you want to micromanage every aspect of their lives. But I think it's surround yourself with a good team, and the good team will take that away from you.
Yeah. So I want to take this back to the very first question I asked you was what's the number one thing that most business owners get wrong about business valuation? You had mentioned the number, which I think is probably almost always true. So with that kind of being the case and thinking of it, even from a small business perspective, like, hey, one day I'm going to retire, and that means I'm going to be done working in my business. Hopefully I can sell it, and that's going to result in X number of dollars. It's going to fund the rest of my life. We see that a lot in the businesses that we've worked with and had conversations with. And I don't know a whole lot of business owners are putting away in their, a 401k or something else like that. The asset is the business, right? That's going to be the thing that they're going to live off of. But if they get this number wrong and they're not looking at it from a context of really what is the business worth, or what can it be worth, or how do I start preparing for that? In your opinion, how, I'll kind of ask this a couple ways because I think there's a few nuggets with this, but when should a business owner start thinking about preparing for that eventual exit?
Best case scenario, day one, but most realistic scenario, I'd say maybe 3 years out, slightly better 5 years out. You know, it's kind of, it's like, think about this, like if we've bought houses, like, you know, you come to buy my house and it looks great on the outside, and then the inspection comes back and 90% of it's got, it's infected with termites. If I then turned around and like a month later said to you, hey, the house is, all the termites are scrubbed, they're completely gone, you're probably going to have moved on, or at least like psychologically, mentally, like checked out with it a little bit. So I think the more prepared you can be, and our M&A report that you were a contributor to kind of highlighted that, like good businesses sell despite market conditions, and they usually sell for a premium. So the level of M&A activity hasn't been affected that badly this year. It's the businesses that are not that good have been affected badly this year.
That's really interesting. And, I've got a mentor and a coach of mine who, he's out buying businesses fairly frequently. He's been doing this for, I think, over a decade. And he's taught us a few things, and I've had the opportunity to go in and take a look at some businesses and see if it's, as an investor, putting the investor hat on and saying, is that something I'm willing to buy? And I think there's a lot of things that you just said that are 100% true, right? There's the businesses that are good businesses, meaning that there are some systems in place. They've moved away from owner dependency. The cash flow is consistent, and they've got the profitability. It's at least maintaining, even if it's not really growing, but it's maintaining. It's not in a decline. Those businesses are almost always going. There's an appetite for that. There's always going to be investors that want to take on those things. There's less risk with it. But then you see the other side of the coin. These businesses that say that they're absolutely amazing, but they've had 3 years in a row of declining sales and almost no profitability. And there's 2 employees, and one of them is the owner, and the owner does 90% of the work, and they're not planning to stay into the business. And by the way, they're not taking a paycheck, so you have to pay somebody to replace them, and all of a sudden profitability is gone, right? You start to kind of look at these different factors, and it's very interesting to see, regardless, especially when market conditions maybe aren't the best out there as a general, kind of global thing. Those, like, I don't want to take on any risk. Like those, not interested. Like give me something that's a little bit easier to pull forward. So that's kind of an interesting piece, but maybe let's talk a little bit about the larger M&A world right now and kind of the scale of things. What are you noticing out there? What are you seeing? Kind of what's some of the reports and feedback that have been coming out over the last 12 months or so? But give us kind of a snapshot in time of what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a pretty tricky situation at the moment. We obviously printed a lot of money in the last couple of years. A lot of that money was financed and pushed to the front of the yield curve. So it's coming to its maturity at the moment, which has kind of squeezed the market a little bit. That's one of the big problems that need to be dealt with. The tariffs are obviously added a level of risk into the market early on. And now, we've got this big, beautiful bill as well, which I think there's some stuff in it that's good, but ultimately it's also adding another $5 trillion to the deficit, which was a bit of a shock. But one thing governments like to do is print money. So I guess it wasn't that big of a surprise after all. But yeah, what I've seen quite a bit of is there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines at the moment, waiting for, I think, for the rates to drop. It's a bit of a tricky situation. Maybe a month or two ago, I would have said that rates would certainly drop, or should be dropping. But I think core CPI came out at 2.9 versus just general CPI at 2.7 last month, which is suggesting that household goods are getting a little bit more expensive, which is, again, going to squeeze the consumer. So how does that affect business, like down the road? Could potentially negatively affect them. So I think businesses that have been set up well to be profitable and and busy throughout all market conditions are going to do quite a bit better. I think those big beautiful bills got some good stuff in it for the taxes, at least from what I've seen, and I've obviously not read the whole thing, but things like full depreciation on machinery and stuff. But that really, when you look at it, that's not affecting this year or next year. I mean, that's affecting probably 3 years down the line at the earliest. So I think overall market conditions, I do think that we are going to get a rate cut. I don't know how long. I would maybe say 25, 50 basis points at the most for the year. I think where the challenge comes in is that's going to increase lending, or at least like stimulate more lending and borrowing. It is going to push the market a little bit more. And then they're going to have to raise rates again to cool the market again. And so now you're going to have more people that are leveraged in conditions that we've already got, like record levels of student debt, auto loan delinquencies, commercial real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been pretty convinced since probably mid-October that we are facing the edge of a credit crisis over here, and we've just somehow just printed our way out of it, like every Fed meeting. So,
it's such an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like when does this reality check come true? Because it's got to come true. It has to. But I mean, your guess is probably as good as mine. I think Ray Dalio's had some good thoughts on this just overall. But yeah, I mean, it is making the business environment and the kind of macro environment a little bit uncertain. But I do think we're still the hottest market on earth, like by a long way. I mean, if you look at the G7 and you look at Europe, I mean, their GDP is like, I think they're barely over 1% on average.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is let's assume some of those things do end up becoming true, right? We get a little bit of a relief on the rate side of things. It's going to push lending a little bit. It's going to loosen up lending, right? So you're going to have a little bit more lending starting to come out, things like that, which realistically may make it a little bit easier for those that are looking to purchase a business. So if you're listening to this and you're sitting on the sidelines going, I want to find a business and I want to be able to buy it and I want to get into this entrepreneurship through acquisition type deal. Loosening up and having additional credit out there and lending is a good thing for that marketplace, is it not?
It is, but you've still got to. I mean, you've got to treat it with respect. You don't want to take too much money that you can't service. You've got to make sure that your cash flow can service it, because, yeah, like I was just saying, borrowing becomes easier when they lower rates. But in a couple of months' time, when they probably inevitably have to hike rates again to cool the market, then you start feeling the pressure of it. So I think just borrow within your limits. I wouldn't take on. I would really understand the tail of the curve with that.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it is one of those things I think is, especially for those that have not taken on debt to buy a business or something like that in the past, and maybe you're thinking about the first purchase. I'll give you a quick story. I was talking to a business owner a couple years ago, before rates really started to kind of increase, things like that. Had just purchased a business here in the area, used SBA loan, things like that. Ended up on an adjustable rate. Rates went up, completely crushed his cash flow, and I honestly don't think he still has the business today. It's one of those things where, yeah, you got to kind of pay attention to what could be, what is that debt service coverage ratio when you're being able to buy the business, what kind of cash flow can it service, and erring on the side of a little bit more cushion may be a smart move, especially if it's your first time kind of growing and building a business.
Yeah, and I think what you just said made me think about something. Another factor that a lot of people don't look at is inflation. Like when you're forecasting out your growth rate as a business, you've got to factor inflation into it as well. Take inflation plus rates. If you're not using that as your hurdle, you're not going anywhere.
It's interesting. Yeah. So if we bring this back to kind of the other side of the equation, talking business valuations, the importance of businesses starting to do that, right? We talked about there almost always being a market for good businesses. Regardless of what the market conditions are, if you've got a strong cash flowing business that doesn't require your involvement as the owner every single day, the likelihood of somebody out there there's almost always going to be credit for it, even if it's not institutional credit. There's investors out there that are willing to kind of lend or be a financial backer of some sort. So taking us back to that, so 3 to 5 years is kind of the smart window, at least, to be able to start preparing for an eventual exit. I'm a big believer that everybody should be doing that, because I don't know about you, but everybody is going to exit their business whether they choose to or not. I always joke, it's either vertically or horizontally. We all are going to exit one day or another. So better prepare for it. So when it comes to valuations, what's your thought? How often or how frequently should a business owner be checking in on their valuation?
That's a really good question, and something I've actually been wrestling with a little bit, because from our perspective, we obviously don't want to come across as trying to push a sale on anybody. But at the same time, I think at least annually you should be looking at this. But it really depends on the phase and the goals of the business. So, I think if you are sitting 5 years out and you're really starting to tighten up the books, if you did it every quarterly even, or semi-annually, I think semi-annually is probably more in line with what's appropriate. But I'm a numbers guy. When I was swimming, it was always like I wanted to know probably every month, especially when I was younger, like, am I improving or am I going backwards? If you don't have the data and you're not actually keeping track of that and keeping track of it closely, you're never going to know whether you're improving or if you're just potentially plateauing while putting in a lot of effort as well.
It's fascinating, because you asked the same question, say, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, right? What was the traditional model for a business owner to go out and get some form of valuation? Is they're paying an arm and a leg for valuation specialists, CPAs, like people with all these credentials, things like that, to be able to get a valuation. And it likely cost them thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars to do so. And, here we are sitting here, in today's day and age, here in 2025, looking at a completely different way of doing it. So I want to kind of give you a moment to talk a little bit about what BizVal does and how, I've gotten a chance to kind of see what the platform is, things like that. And you really make the business valuation a tool that's accessible, that makes it really, if you want to do an annual or a quarterly valuation, it's really not the same thing it was 5 years ago. So, can you share a little bit about kind of what that looks like, and kind of the power of the tool that you guys have?
Yeah, so we were actually founded, like the genesis for BizVal was based on exactly what you were talking about, just frustration with the turnaround times of valuations, them costing $75,000 to get it done, and then you get a 50-page report with like 40 pages of legal disclaimers, and the rest is like bios and maybe 2 pages of actual important data that you're looking at. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to speak to entrepreneurs in a language that they could understand. All of us come from capital markets backgrounds, so I can bash capital markets professionals all day. We talk in language around a table with people that might not even be in capital markets that no one else can understand, and it's not necessary. I think it's, it's in a sense, I'm going to get in real trouble saying this, but it's a way of almost like reinforcing self-importance. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to pull a Band-Aid off of that and say, okay, well, we can get to the same outcome while speaking to business owners in a language that they can understand. So what we essentially do is we understand like your legal structure of your business, what your business is made up of. So your employees, we'll build out your income statement. We'll separate things out, like you quite rightly said, like for owner's salary. So we'll ask for salary and wage costs, but then we'll ask what is a fair market salary for a replacement CEO. The reason why we ask that is also touching on your point. They're either overpaying themselves or they're underpaying themselves. Then we'll split out things like marketing, advertising, because certain line items will effectively grow like with the business, like advertising, for instance. Then we'll look at working capital cycles. We'll look at levels of debt in the business and effectively the rest of the balance sheet. And we look at replacement value for machinery. We're assuming, okay, machine goes down, like what's the replacement cost of that? And then we go into growth rates at the end. So we'll look at your next 12 months growth rate, and then we'll look at the subsequent 36 months. And what we do based off of that is we then model out a 5-year DCF with the income statement attached. And basically, if your valuation is X, these are the numbers you need to hit in order to sustain that valuation. But we have a blended approach. So we've got the DCF, which we like to say is the kind of best case scenario. If someone's coming in to buy it, that's the most the seller's likely going to extract out of the business. Then we
and for those that are listening, DCF stands for discounted cash flow.
Yeah, and then so it's very forward looking. I know some of the brokers don't like that as much, and they'll go back to earnings multiples, which is the market based approach. But we look at the earnings multiples as a sense check more than anything else. Like, this is where the market is trading. This is kind of where you can expect offers to probably start from the buyer. And then we got the net asset value as well, which that there's just, worst case scenario, you don't have a business. This may be, which happens sometimes, and it's okay. But sometimes you just have to liquidate your assets and pay off your debts, and that's what's going to be the best outcome for everybody. But we can turn this around in like 30 to 45 minutes. So we've had certain situations where we get on a call with somebody that has been a lead, and we're like, hey, do you have your financials handy? And we're like, well, if you've got an hour, let's do it. And they're completely shocked by our ability to do that, because we did one last week, and the guy said, oh, I thought I was going to send you my financials and then hear back from you in like 2 weeks.
It's pretty amazing, the turnaround time. The fact that we can leverage some of the technology out there today to be able to pull this stuff in, create the models, and put that out there. But why I think this is important is going back to frequency, right? The world's changing much faster than ever before in history. You talk about, is the market hot? What's going on? That valuation may change based on how quickly your business is shifting and adjusting and things like that. I don't know about you. I tend to go to Zillow and check out my home's value right now it's every month because I put it into a spreadsheet and I'm tracking everything. But at least, a couple times per year, things like that. And I think most people will do that. So having a tool to be able to check on this really important piece of, I own this asset, right? I have this business. It's going to be my retirement, things like that. To not know that number is almost irresponsible. Like, you wouldn't not want to know what the value of your retirement accounts are. You wouldn't want to not know what the value of your home your home is, things like that. So we really shouldn't allow that same thing to happen within a business.
Yeah, and I think
it's the most important asset you have.
Yeah, I think one of the other critical aspects of what we do is we'll always be on a call with a business owner, and we will explain to them the cost and revenue drivers. And then, say the business owner thought that their business was worth 10 million, but it's actually worth 2 million. Then we can go in on the back end and run different scenarios and sensitivities and show them what they actually need to do in order to get it to 10 million. So they end up walking away with an education and with a plan. And we'll probably take 30 minutes to go through the process, and then we'll sit with them for 30 minutes, sometimes a little longer if needed. But I think the important thing is really the educational aspect to the owners, because if they can walk away and feel like they've got some value out of it, then it's a win-win.
Yeah, I really like that. So I'm going to shift us a little bit, and I did not warn you ahead of time that I was going to move in this direction. So I'm curious in your thoughts. And obviously, the world is very much driven in this direction of AI at the moment, and it's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to move forward. That tends to be my viewpoint. How do you see that impacting either how we look at valuations, whether that's something that's being looked at as incorporated into the models when it comes to being able to generate valuations? We could take it that direction, or what does a valuation of a company look like if, let's say I'm going to go buy a business, or I'm going to sell my business. Let's start with that. I'm going to sell my business in the next 5 years. we've got two different avenues. We've got one avenue where, I take our business and we heavily adopt and look at every way that we can incorporate AI as it continues to come out. And the other one is I'm never going to incorporate or do anything else with it. When you look at those kind of two different trajectories, how do you see things playing out when it comes to business's ability to sell, valuation, kind of a mix of the things that we've talked about today?
It's a really good question, and one that will probably keep me up tonight. But no, I mean, I've thought about a little bit. I think that AI, I mean, I agree with you, it's not going anywhere. And businesses do need to adopt AI in order to kind of keep up. I mean, it's just all turning into efficiency plays, and we're becoming so efficient that we're almost going to price ourselves out of the market, and be replaced by these robots, and at least judging by some of the videos that I've seen. But I think what protects a lot of businesses and what will always be required is that human-to-human communication. Look, I mean, using like a bank as an example, like when you call them and you have to sit trying to, I don't know if you have this problem, but with my accent, that's what I keep blaming and at least thinking it is these robots at the banks do not get me to the person that I want to get to. And it leaves me frustrated all the time, which I do think, like for smaller businesses, they're way more sensitive to that type of stuff. So I think that there's still going to be a human touch. And the businesses that can blend AI with the human aspect are going to thrive. But I think businesses going full AI, when there's problems, like it's probably going to be hard to resolve, at least in the short term. What is short term? I mean, who knows? Probably your guess is as good as mine, but I would say in 5 years, we're going to be in a vastly different world. But yeah, there's almost certainly, I mean, we're just going to have to try to do that blended approach of humans and AI.
It's definitely one of those questions. I love just getting everyone's perspective, especially in different industries and fields and kind of different things that you're focused on. And I make it a point in almost all of the episodes that I record to ask some questions around it, because it's really fun to see the different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, just thinking about this like kind of in real time, if you took somebody and you said, okay, we're going to drive cars from point A to point B, give one person a paper map, and you give another person, give them a Tesla with like the full mapping on the screen. If you don't adopt AI, you're the person with a map. You're not going to get to point B as quickly as the person in point A. And so I think there's like an inevitability for businesses to adopt it. Just again, be responsible with it.
That's a really interesting analogy. I really like that. I may steal that at some point here in the future. Have you heard Daniel Priestley's analogy on AI? His is essentially you've got multiple people running a marathon. You've got some people that are still running, and the rules have changed. So some people have learned what those rules are, and they've been able to get on a bike, and now they're taking a bike. And then there's others that have figured out the rules that say it's okay to jump into a Lamborghini and drive that. And they're getting done in a fraction of the time, and you've got the people on the other end of the spectrum still running, saying, well, why is there such a big discrepancy? And your analogy really kind of hit home in terms of like understanding what's the destination. The clearer the destination is, the faster you can go. I think it's very similar to that in terms of understanding, maybe what we could have thought about for our business in 10 years can now be done in 3 years or 2 years with some of these tools that are becoming available, and how to adopt them. Not because the destination has necessarily changed, but because our ability to get on the path and drive faster and not take as many missteps. Yeah,
missteps and also pauses and stops. I mean, look, I know in the 80s and 90s it was a wild time. I mean, people would drive and have their maps up like this, but yeah, I imagine myself driving with a map now, and I would probably have to pull over to the side of the road, stop, trace it with our finger, and just in that you've lost that time.
Oh, I still go back to even just the days of, you take a step forward from having the big maps out, and I remember MapQuest, and you'd print out the instructions. It would tell you turn here and turn here and turn here, but still paper. Like even that to me would be like I'd still have to like reread it and be like, wait, am I going the right way?
It is an interesting story. I actually had to do something similar to that at one point. I had a motorcycle and I forgot to put one of these adventure bikes, and I'd forgotten to put the GPS on there, and I didn't know how to get to this place. It's actually a funny story. So I was going to Zimbabwe, I think like the next day, and one of the places I was renting camera gear from dropped the ball, and my shipment didn't get to me. So I was like scrambling like day before, trying between work and whatnot, trying to find different rental places. But I had taken my bike that day to work, and so I ended up I have this like clear sleeve pocket over here, and so I ended up having to basically write out the instructions: turn right at, turn left at, and wedge it in the sleeve. I'll tell you, it was like, I hate to say it, geez, it was stressful. I was like, if I don't end up dead after doing this, it's like a good day.
Oh, it's amazing how those little things become so much more stressful than they used to feel back way back when. But Kyle, this has been fun. I want to before I leave on kind of one final question here. For those that are listening or watching right now, where can they go to connect with you? Obviously, there's been a lot of things that we've talked about from a business valuation side of things. You've got a wealth of knowledge. You've got some really good connections within the community. Very plugged into all things BizVal. Where can they go for a little bit more information? How can they connect with you? And let's start with that.
Yeah, cool. So LinkedIn, Kyle McCulloch, and then my email. It's just kyle@bizvalglobal.com. That's BIZVAL global.com. It's probably the easiest place to find me.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to encourage everyone to, at minimum, connect with you on LinkedIn. If not, if you're feeling courageous, send Kyle an email. Just say, hey, saw you on the episode. Great conversation, all that kind of stuff. Because it's always good to have some of those connections out there. So I'm going to always highly encourage that. But as we wrap this out, Kyle, as you kind of think through today's marketplace, think through business valuations, knowing that the audience here is primarily small business owners, entrepreneurs, what's one kind of final piece of advice and or just something that you'd want to leave the audience with before we wrap up today?
Something that I got told really early on is lean into the boring stuff. Like that's where the biggest gains are made. So I used to hate doing drills in the pool. Hated it until I got told that, and it kind of clicked pretty immediately to me. It was like, do this stuff, other people aren't doing it, and that's going to get you ahead a lot faster than trying to chase the shiny tinsel or whatever you'd like to call it.
That's a good one. And I can 100% empathize and relate to that one. And in business, for some of you, that may be the numbers. So don't shy away from the boring.
And have a good bookkeeper and a good CPA. I mean, it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Man, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. Kyle, anytime I get a chance to chat with you and catch up is always fun. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of this wealth of knowledge from this crazy and awesome journey that you've had. And excited to connect you with some folks here. And just thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.